What if the life you're about to give up on is actually the one that could change everything? In this slow, real English story, I share how I left everything behind to start over in Washington State, struggled with language, culture, love, and family, and slowly rebuilt my confidence. If you feel lost, tired, or ready to quit learning English, this story might quietly change your mind. Leaving everything behind. I didn't hear that sentence from a motivational speaker. I didn't read it in a book. I felt it, quietly, painfully, on a cold night when my suitcase sat open on the floor, and my entire life somehow fit inside it. You know that strange moment when everything looks normal, but inside you feel like something is ending? That was me. My room looked the same. My phone was still buzzing. My family was in the next room. But my mind, it was already somewhere else, somewhere far away, a place I had only seen in videos and subtitles. Washington State. Rain. Silence. English everywhere. And me, barely able to understand half of it. Let's be honest for a second. You're probably here because learning English feels heavy sometimes. Like your brain just refuses to cooperate. You listen, but nothing sticks. You read, but forget everything. You try to speak, and your mouth freezes like it's buffering. I've been there. Not once. Many times. And here's the uncomfortable truth, your brain isn't broken. It's just scared. Science actually explains this pretty well. When you face something unfamiliar, like a new language, a new country, a completely different life, your brain activates what's called the threat response. It's the same system that once protected humans from wild animals. Except now, instead of a tiger, it's a fast-talking cashier asking, paper or plastic? Your brain goes, nope. We're in danger. So you shut down. You avoid. You delay. That's exactly what I almost did. I remember sitting there, staring at my flight ticket. One way. No backup plan. No guarantee. Just a quiet question sitting in my chest. Am I really ready to begin again? Not just learning English again. Not just starting a new job. I'm talking about rebuilding identity. Becoming the version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. And here's the funny part, no one tells you this, but starting over doesn't feel exciting at first. It feels stupid. You suddenly can't express simple thoughts. You overthink basic sentences. You smile awkwardly when you don't understand. You nod like you agree, even when you have absolutely no idea what the other person just said. That was going to be my life. And I knew it. Still, something inside me refused to stay the same. Maybe you felt that too. That quiet frustration. That voice that says, there has to be more than this. So I closed the suitcase. Not dramatically. Not confidently. Just, slowly. That night, I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. But I also felt something else, something small, almost invisible. Curiosity. What if this works? That question is powerful. Not because it guarantees success, but because it gives your brain permission to move forward without needing certainty. And that's the trick most people miss. You don't need confidence to start. You just need a reason not to stay. The next morning, everything moved fast. Airports don't wait for your emotions. Planes don't care about your doubts. You just follow the signs, show your passport, and suddenly you're sitting there, looking out the window as your entire life shrinks into clouds. I remember whispering to myself, in very simple English. I will try. Not I will succeed. Not I will be fluent. Just, I will try. Because when your goal feels too big, your brain resists. But when it's small and clear, your brain relaxes. This is called cognitive load. The simpler the task, the more likely you are to act. So I kept it simple. I will try to listen. I will try to speak. I will try to understand. That was my entire plan. Somewhere between the clouds and the silence, I realized something important. Learning English was no longer just a skill. It was survival. It was connection. It was love, waiting to happen. But I didn't know that yet. At that moment, I was just a person on a plane, holding on to a fragile decision, hoping it wouldn't break the moment I landed. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you're holding on to something similar. Maybe you haven't bought the ticket yet. Maybe your Washington state is not a place, but a goal, a dream, a version of yourself that feels out of reach. And maybe, just maybe, you're tired of starting and stopping. Let me tell you something simple, something real. Progress doesn't come from perfect plans. It comes from uncomfortable beginnings. That's why stories like this matter. Not because everything works out easily, but because you get to see what happens after the fear. And trust me, the fear is just the beginning. When the plane finally started to descend, I looked outside and saw endless gray skies, tall trees, and a world that felt completely unfamiliar. Beautiful, but distant. I took a deep breath and said one more sentence to myself, slowly, clearly. New life, start now. It sounded a little broken. A little incomplete. But it was enough. Because sometimes, your first step doesn't need to be perfect English. It just needs to be honest. And what I didn't know back then was this, that one small step would lead me to love, to family. To a voice I didn't think I had, and to a version of myself that would one day tell the story to you. But before any of that happened, I had to survive my first day in America. And that is where everything truly began. First days in America. Have you ever walked into a place where everyone seems to understand everything, except you? That was my first morning in Washington state. No dramatic music. No slow-motion movie scene. Just a quiet, gray sky, cold air, and a strange feeling that the world was moving too fast, in a language I couldn't fully catch. You'd think after all those months of learning English, watching videos, repeating phrases, memorizing vocabulary, I would feel ready. I wasn't. The moment I stepped outside, reality hit me harder than I expected. People spoke quickly, naturally, casually, like English wasn't something they had to think about. Words blended together. Sounds disappeared. Sentences felt like one long, confusing wave. Hi, how's it going, you all set? My brain heard. Going, set. And in that moment, something very human happened. I smiled. And nodded. That little fake smile? It's universal. It's what your brain does when it doesn't understand but doesn't want to look lost. It's a social survival trick. Psychologists call it masking uncertainty, your brain protecting your identity from embarrassment. But here's the problem. The more you pretend to understand, the less you actually learn. And I was about to repeat that mistake over and over again. The first real challenge came in a simple place, a coffee shop. Sounds harmless, right? It wasn't. The menu looked familiar, but the words felt different. Drip coffee, latte, to go, for here? Simple phrases, but when spoken quickly, they felt like code. The cashier smiled and asked something. I froze. Not physically, but mentally. This is what happens when your brain hits overload. Too much information, too fast, in a language that isn't automatic yet. Your working memory, the part of your brain that processes language in real time, gets overwhelmed. It's like trying to run too many apps on an old phone. Everything slows down. Or crashes. So I did what most people do in that moment. I guessed. Yes. Wrong answer. The cashier paused, slightly confused, then repeated the question slower. For here, or to go? Ah. Now I understood. And in that tiny moment, something clicked. It wasn't that my English was terrible. It was that real English is different from learning English. Textbook English is clean, clear, predictable. Real English is messy, fast, emotional, full of shortcuts. And no one really prepares you for that. So there I was, holding a cup of coffee, feeling like I had just passed a small but important test. But the day didn't get easier. Every interaction felt like a mini challenge. Asking for directions. Understanding signs. Listening to conversations around me. Even simple things like hearing someone say "excuse me" behind me made my brain go into panic mode for a second. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. When you don't understand a language, you don't just feel confused. You feel invisible. You feel slower, smaller, less confident. You start to question yourself. Why is this so hard? Am I not good enough? Maybe I'll never sound natural. That inner voice? It gets loud. But what's happening in your brain is actually very logical. You're building new neural pathways. New connections between sounds, meanings, and responses. And just like building muscles, it feels weak at the beginning. You don't walk into a gym and lift the heaviest weight on day one. But somehow, with language, we expect ourselves to be fluent immediately. That expectation is the real problem. By the afternoon, I was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally. Listening in a second language for hours is one of the most energy-consuming things your brain can do. Studies show that language processing in a non-native language uses significantly more cognitive resources. That's why you feel tired even if you didn't do much. Your brain was working overtime. I remember sitting alone later that day, replaying conversations in my head. Trying to understand what people said. Trying to hear the words again. Trying to catch up. And then something interesting happened. I stopped blaming my English. Instead, I got curious again. What exactly did I miss? That question changed everything. Because instead of saying I'm bad at English, I started asking which part was unclear. Was it the speed? The accent? The vocabulary? The way words connected? That shift, from judgment to curiosity, is powerful. It turns frustration into progress. So that night, instead of giving up, I did something very simple. I replayed one sentence I heard that day. Just one. Slowly. I'll take a latte to go. I repeated it. Again and again. Not perfectly. Not confidently. but consistently. Because here's a small secret. Fluency doesn't come from understanding everything. It comes from repeating small things until they become automatic. That was the beginning of my real learning. Not in a classroom. Not from a textbook. But from real life. From mistakes. From awkward moments. From coffee orders that felt like interviews. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized something surprising. People weren't judging me. They were patient. Sometimes even kind. It was my own fear making everything feel harder than it was. And fear has a funny way of exaggerating reality. It tells you, everyone is watching you. But in truth, most people are too busy thinking about themselves. That realization gave me a little space to breathe. A little space to try again. A little space to speak, even if it wasn't perfect. But just when I started to feel a tiny bit more comfortable, something happened that completely broke my confidence again. A conversation I couldn't follow. A moment I couldn't fake. A silence that felt too long. And that's when I realized. Understanding a menu is one thing. Understanding people is something else entirely. And that challenge? It was waiting for me the very next day. When English feels impossible. Have you ever been in a conversation where you understand every word, except the meaning? It sounds strange, right? But that's exactly what happened to me on my third day in Washington State. Up until that moment, I thought my biggest problem was vocabulary. Learn more words, understand more English. Simple. It wasn't. Because real conversations don't wait for you to translate. They move. Fast. Messy. Emotional. And if you pause too long, the moment is gone. I was standing in a small break room at work. Nothing special, just a table, a microwave, a few people talking casually. They were laughing. Sharing stories. Speaking English the way it's meant to be spoken, naturally, without effort. I told myself, this is it. Just listen. Try to join. So I stepped closer. Someone said something. Everyone laughed. I caught the words. But not the joke. And suddenly, I was standing there, smiling again. That same polite smile. That same quiet panic. Your brain does something very interesting in moments like this. It tries to fill in the gaps. Even when you don't fully understand, it guesses based on tone, facial expressions, context. Sometimes it works. Sometimes, it fails completely. This time, it failed. Because a few seconds later, someone looked at me and asked a question. A real question. Not how are you? Not coffee or tea? Something longer. Something faster. And I froze. You know that feeling when your brain just goes blank? It's not that you don't know English. It's that your brain can't access it fast enough. That's called language retrieval failure. It happens when your brain hasn't automated the connection between understanding and speaking yet. In simple words, your English is there, but it's locked. And the key? You don't have it yet. So I stood there, searching for words that refused to come. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Silence. It felt much longer. And then, I said the most common sentence every English learner uses when they're lost. Sorry, can you repeat? They did. Slower this time. Clearer. Kinder. But something had already changed inside me. Confidence dropped. Because now, it wasn't just about understanding. It was about keeping up. And keeping up is a different game. You're not just translating anymore. You're reacting. Responding. Participating. That's where many people give up. Not because they're lazy, but because the gap between learning English and living in English feels too big. And here's the uncomfortable truth. That gap is real. But it's also temporary. I didn't know that yet. All I felt in that moment was frustration. I went back to my seat later, replaying the conversation in my head like a broken recording. What did they say? Why didn't I understand? Why couldn't I answer? And then came the worst thought of all. Maybe I'm just not good at this. That sentence is dangerous. Because once you believe it, your brain stops trying. It protects you by avoiding discomfort. No more conversations. No more risks. No more progress. Just safety. But safety doesn't teach you anything. That afternoon, I almost decided to stop trying so hard. To stay quiet. To only speak when necessary. To survive, instead of grow. And honestly, that's what many people do. They live in a country for years, but never truly feel part of it. Because language isn't just words. It's connection. It's belonging. And without it, everything feels distant. But something unexpected interrupted that downward spiral. A memory. A very simple one. I remembered how I learned my first words in English. Not from grammar books. Not from rules. But from repetition. From hearing the same things again and again until they became familiar. So I asked myself a different question. What if I don't need to understand everything, yet? That question changed the direction of my thinking. Because maybe the goal wasn't to be perfect. Maybe the goal was just to stay in the game. So I started small again. That evening, instead of avoiding English, I leaned into it. I replayed short conversations. I listened to simple phrases. I paid attention to how people connected words. Did you became Jew? Want to became wanna? Going to became gonna? It wasn't wrong English. It was real English. And suddenly, things started to make more sense. Not everything. But enough. Enough to keep going. There's something called pattern recognition in the brain. The more you hear something, the more your brain starts predicting it. That's how native speakers understand fast speech. They're not hearing every word clearly. They're predicting based on patterns. And I was just starting to build those patterns. Slowly. Messily. But surely. The next day, I went back to that same break room. Same table. Same people. Same fear. But this time, I was slightly different. I didn't try to understand everything. I just focused on one sentence at a time. One idea. One reaction. And when I didn't understand, I didn't panic. I listened again. I stayed present. And then, something small, but important, happened. I caught a joke. Not perfectly. Not fully. But enough to smile, for real this time. That tiny moment felt bigger than it should have. Because it wasn't about the joke. It was about progress. And progress, even small, changes how you see yourself. But just when I thought I was starting to figure things out, life decided to test me in a completely different way. Not with strangers. Not with coworkers. But with someone who would change everything. Because the next person I struggled to understand would also be the person I started to fall in love with. And trust me, understanding English is one thing. Understanding love in another language? That's a whole different challenge. A small moment of kindness. Have you ever had one small moment change the way you see everything? Not a big success. Not a dramatic turning point. Just something simple, almost easy to miss, but somehow it stays with you. For me, that moment happened on a rainy afternoon in Washington State. Of course it was raining. It felt like the sky there had only two settings, light rain and more rain. I was standing at a bus stop, holding my phone, pretending to read something important. In reality, I was avoiding eye contact with the world. Avoiding conversations. Avoiding another situation where I might not understand, or worse, not respond. You see, after a few difficult days, your brain starts to create patterns. If speaking English is uncomfortable, avoid speaking. If conversations feel risky, stay quiet. It's efficient. It's protective. And it slowly traps you. That day, I was deep in that trap. I had already decided something in my mind. I will just observe. I won't talk unless I have to. Sounds safe, right? But safety has a cost. Because every time you choose silence over effort, your progress pauses. Not forever, but long enough to make you feel stuck. The bus was late. The rain got heavier. People stood around, quiet, each in their own little world. And then, something unexpected happened. Someone spoke to me. Hey, is this bus always this slow? Simple sentence. Clear words. But still, my brain needed a second. I looked up. It was a woman, probably around my age, holding an umbrella, smiling, not in a polite way, but in a real, relaxed way. The kind of smile that doesn't pressure you. And in that moment, I had a choice. Smile and nod, like before. Or try. You already know what my brain wanted. Stay safe. Don't risk it. But something inside me pushed back. Maybe it was frustration. Maybe it was curiosity again. Or maybe I was just tired of feeling invisible. So I answered. Slowly. Yes. I think always slow. Not perfect. Not smooth. But real. She laughed lightly, not at me, but with the situation. Yeah, I think so too. And just like that, the conversation didn't end. That's the part that surprised me the most. Because in my mind, I believed something very strong. If my English isn't good, people won't want to talk to me. But reality said something different. People care more about connection than perfection. She asked another question. Are you new here? Now, this was slightly harder. More words. More meaning. But I didn't panic. I took a breath. Yes. I just arrived, few days. Again, simple. Broken. But enough. And here's something interesting your brain does when you relax. It processes language better. When you're anxious, your brain focuses on survival, not learning. But when you feel safe even a little, your brain opens up. That's exactly what happened. The conversation continued. Not fast. Not deep. But steady. She spoke a little slower. Not in a fake way, but in a considerate way. And I listened more carefully, not trying to catch every word, but focusing on the message. That shift is important. Because understanding meaning is more useful than understanding every word. At one point, I didn't understand something she said. In the past, I would have smiled and pretended. But this time, I did something different. I asked. Sorry, what is commute? She paused for a second, then explained. It means traveling to work. Simple. Clear. Helpful. And suddenly, I learned something real. Not from a book. Not from a lesson. But from life. That's when I realized something powerful. Learning English doesn't have to be separate from living your life. It can happen inside it. Every question you ask. Every mistake you make. Every small conversation. They all count. By the time the bus arrived, something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically. Not completely. But enough. Enough to feel a little lighter. A little more connected. A little less afraid. We got on the bus. Sat in different seats. No big goodbye. No exchange of contacts. Just a moment. A small, ordinary moment. But it stayed with me. Because it broke a belief I didn't even realize I had. The belief that I had to be good enough before I could participate. That I had to wait until my English was perfect before I deserved to be heard. But that's not how it works. You become good by participating. Not before. That day, I didn't learn a lot of vocabulary. I didn't master grammar. I didn't suddenly become fluent. But I gained something more important. Permission. Permission to try. Permission to speak. Permission to be imperfect. And sometimes, that's all you need to move forward. There's actually a concept in psychology called self-efficacy. It's your belief in your ability to succeed in specific situations. And the fastest way to build it is through small wins. Not big achievements. Small, real experiences where you realize, I can do this. That bus stop conversation? That was my small win. And it changed the way I approached everything after that. I started asking more questions. Taking more risks. Speaking a little more, even when I wasn't sure. Because now, I had proof. Not theory. Not advice. Proof. But life has a way of building on small moments. That one conversation didn't just improve my English. It opened the door to something I wasn't expecting at all. Because a few days later, I saw her again. Same smile. Same calm energy. But this time, the conversation went further. Much further. And that's when things started to change in a way I never planned. Because sometimes, the person who helps you find your voice is also the person who slowly becomes your story. Learning through real life. What if the fastest way to learn English is not studying more, but living more? Sounds a little backwards, right? Because most people think the solution is simple: more vocabulary, more grammar, more time with books. That's what I thought too. Until real life proved me wrong. After that small moment at the bus stop, something shifted inside me. Not a huge transformation, no dramatic now I'm fluent moment, but a quiet change in how I approached English. Before, I treated English like a subject. Now, I started treating it like a tool. And tools are meant to be used, not memorized. A few days later, I found a part-time job. Nothing glamorous. Just a small local grocery store in Washington State. Shelves, boxes, customers, short conversations. The kind of place where real English lives, not perfect, not slow, but real. And let me tell you, this place became my classroom. Not because it was easy, but because it wasn't. The first day, I was given simple instructions. At least, they were supposed to be simple. Stock these items. Check the labels. Put them on aisle 5. In my head, I translated everything. Slowly. Too slowly. By the time I understood the first instruction, the second one had already come. That's when I realized something important. Translating in your head is too slow for real life. Your brain can't keep up if it has to go from English your language meaning response back to English. That's like taking 5 steps when you only have time for 1. So I tried something different. Instead of translating, I started connecting words directly to actions. Stock put items on shelf. Check look carefully. Aisle 5 location. No translation. Just meaning. It felt strange at first. Like skipping a step your brain was used to. But slowly, it became faster. And speed matters. Because real conversations don't wait. Throughout the day, customers would come and ask questions. Where can I find milk? Do you have this in a different size? Is this on sale? Simple questions. But when spoken naturally, they didn't sound simple anymore. Sometimes I understood. Sometimes I didn't. And when I didn't, I had 2 choices. Pretend or ask. Before, I would pretend. Now, I asked. Sorry, can you say again? Slow please. What do you mean? Not perfect sentences. But effective. And here's the surprising part. People didn't get annoyed. Most of them slowed down. Repeated. Helped. Because communication is a two-way street. When you show effort, people meet you halfway. That's something no textbook teaches you. One afternoon, an older man came into the store. He asked me something long, fast, and full of words I didn't recognize. I caught maybe 30%. Before, that would have been the end. Smile. Nod. Guess. But this time, I stayed present. I listened again. Picked out keywords. Looking, special, bread, not here, maybe? I didn't understand everything. But I understood enough. So I responded. Ah, you looking for special bread? Not this store, maybe next store. Not perfect grammar. But clear meaning. He smiled. Yes. Thank you. That moment might seem small. But it wasn't. Because I didn't need perfect English to communicate. I just needed enough. This is something many learners struggle with, the idea that they must speak perfectly before they speak at all. But real communication doesn't work like that. It's messy. Incomplete. Human. And the more you accept that, the faster you improve. There's actually a concept in language learning called comprehensible input. It means you learn best when you understand most, but not all, of what you hear. Around 70 to 80% is enough. Your brain fills in the rest over time. That's exactly what was happening to me. I didn't understand everything. But I understood enough to keep going. And that enough kept growing. Day by day. Conversation by conversation. Mistake by mistake. Another thing I noticed was repetition. Customers asked the same kinds of questions. Again. And again. And again. At first, it felt repetitive. Then, it became useful. Because repetition builds automatic responses. After hearing "where is the milk" 10 times, your brain doesn't need to translate anymore. It just reacts. Over there. Aisle 3. Fast. Natural. Easy. That's how fluency is built. Not from one perfect lesson, but from hundreds of small, repeated moments. And something else started to happen too. I began to enjoy it. Not every moment. Not every conversation. But the process. The small improvements. The little victories. Understanding one more sentence than yesterday. Responding a little faster. Feeling a little more confident. Those things add up. And confidence? It changes everything. Because when you feel more confident, you take more risks. You speak more. You listen more carefully. You engage. And engagement accelerates learning. But the most unexpected part of all this? It wasn't just my English improving. It was my connection to people. I started recognizing regular customers. Smiling more naturally. Understanding jokes, sometimes. Feeling less like an outsider. And more like someone who belonged. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. And that feeling? It's powerful. Because language is not just about words. It's about belonging. But just when I started to feel comfortable in this routine, life introduced something new. Something I wasn't prepared for. Because one day, in that same store, someone walked in. And everything felt different. Not because of the situation, but because of how I felt. Nervous. Curious. Strangely aware of every word I wanted to say. Because this time, it wasn't just about understanding English. It was about wanting to be understood. And that changes everything. Because sometimes, the reason you improve faster is not because you study harder, but because someone makes you want to try harder. And I didn't know it yet. But that moment was the beginning of something much bigger than language. Love begins unexpectedly. Have you ever noticed how your English suddenly improves when you really want someone to understand you? Not in a classroom. Not during practice. But in that one moment, when it actually matters. That's exactly what happened to me. It was a normal day at the grocery store. Same shelves. Same routine. Same simple conversations repeating over and over again. And then, she walked in. Nothing dramatic. No slow motion. No music. But my brain? Suddenly working at 200%. You know that feeling, right? When you become very aware of yourself. Your voice. Your words. Your mistakes. Because now, it matters. She wasn't doing anything special. Just looking at products, comparing labels, thinking quietly. But there was something calm about her. Something that made the noise in my head louder. What if she talks to me? What if I don't understand? What if I say something wrong? And here's the funny part. Just a few days ago, I was learning to relax, to accept imperfect English. Now, all that confidence disappeared in seconds. Because this time, it wasn't just about communication. It was about impression. And your brain treats those two very differently. When you want to impress someone, your brain raises the standard. Suddenly, good enough doesn't feel good enough anymore. It wants perfect. And perfect slows you down. I tried to focus on my work, but I kept noticing her. Not in an obvious way, but enough to stay aware. And then it happened. She came to the counter. Of course she did. Out of all the lines, she chose mine. And just like that, my simple routine became a test I didn't study for. Hi, she said, smiling naturally. Hi, I replied. Simple. Safe. So far, so good. She placed her items down and said something. Fast. Too fast. My brain caught pieces. Is this organic or regular? I paused. Not long, but long enough for my brain to start overthinking. Don't mess this up. Just answer. You know this. And I did. I think organic. Not smooth. Not confident. But clear enough. She nodded. Okay, thanks. And then, silence. That small window where you could say something more, or let the moment pass. Most people let it pass. I almost did. But something inside me pushed again. That same curiosity. That same quiet voice from before. What if this works? So I tried. You new here? Not the best sentence. Not grammatically perfect. But real. She smiled again, slightly amused, but not in a bad way. Yeah, I just moved here last week. Wait. That changed everything. She was new too. Suddenly, the gap I felt got smaller. Because now, it wasn't just me trying to adapt. It was both of us. And that creates something powerful. Connection. We talked for a few more seconds. Simple things. Where are you from? How do you like it here? Basic questions. Basic answers. But each sentence felt like a small step forward. Not just in English, but in confidence. And here's something interesting your brain does when you're emotionally engaged. It learns faster. Because emotion strengthens memory. That's why you remember embarrassing moments, exciting moments, meaningful conversations more clearly than random information. This moment? My brain was paying attention. Every word. Every tone. Every reaction. Because it mattered. Before she left, she said something simple. See you around. 3 words. But they stayed in my mind much longer than they should have. Because those words meant possibility. And possibility changes how you act. The next few days felt different. Not dramatically, but noticeably. I paid more attention to my English. Not because I had to, But because I wanted to, I started practicing small phrases in my head, thinking about how to ask better questions, how to respond more naturally, how to keep a conversation going just a little longer. And here's the key difference. Before, I was learning English to survive. Now, I was learning English to connect. That shift is everything. Because survival creates pressure. Connection creates motivation. And motivation? It's much stronger. A few days later, she came back. Same store. Same calm energy. This time, I was slightly more prepared. Not fluent. Not perfect. But ready to try again. Hi, she said. Hi, you come back, I replied, smiling. She laughed lightly. Yeah, I guess I like this store. That sentence was simple. But it opened the door again. We talked a little more this time. Still slow. Still basic. But more natural. And something interesting started to happen. I stopped focusing on my mistakes. And started focusing on the conversation. Because when you care about the message, not the form, communication improves. That's something many learners don't realize. Perfection blocks flow. Imperfect action creates it. And the more we talked, the more I realized something. She wasn't judging my English. She was responding to my effort. To my presence. To my willingness to communicate. And that's what people actually care about. Not perfect grammar. Not perfect pronunciation. But real interaction. But of course, nothing grows without challenges. Because just as things started to feel comfortable, life introduced something new. Something more complex. More emotional. More difficult to express. Because casual conversations are one thing. But when feelings get involved, when you want to say more than just basic sentences, when you want to express thoughts, emotions, intentions, that's when language becomes real. And that's when the real struggle begins. Because soon, I wasn't just trying to understand her words. I was trying to understand her. And more importantly, I wanted her to understand me. And that's where everything becomes complicated. Because love doesn't speak in simple sentences. And I was about to learn that the hard way. Cultural differences in love. Have you ever tried to explain your feelings, but the words didn't feel strong enough? Not because you don't feel deeply, but because the language you're using doesn't carry your heart the way your native language does. That's where things started to get complicated for me. Because talking about groceries, directions, or daily life, that was manageable. But talking about emotions? About love? That's a completely different level. And I didn't realize how big that gap was until I started getting closer to her. At first, everything felt simple. Light conversations. Small jokes. Easy smiles. We met a few more times, sometimes at the store, sometimes outside. Coffee. Walks. Short talks about life. Nothing serious. But something was growing. And here's the thing about connection, it doesn't need perfect language to begin. But it does need something real to continue. One evening, we were walking through a quiet street in Washington State. The air was cold, the sky already dark, and the sound of light rain filled the silence between us. She said something. Not fast. Not complicated. but meaningful. I like talking to you. Simple sentence. Very simple. But my brain? It didn't know what to do with it. Because understanding the words is one thing. Understanding the weight of the words is something else. In my language, there are many ways to respond to that. Subtle differences. Emotional tones. Cultural expectations. But in English? I froze again. Not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't know how to respond correctly. That's when I realized something important. Language is not just words. It's culture. It's how people express feelings, respect, boundaries, affection. And those things are not always the same. In my culture, emotions are often more indirect. You show care through actions, through silence, through small gestures. But here, people say things more directly. I like you. I miss you. I feel comfortable with you. And for someone still learning the language, that directness can feel overwhelming. So I responded the only way I knew how. I like talking to you too. Simple. Safe. But inside, there was so much more I wanted to say. That's the frustrating part. When your feelings are complex, but your language is still simple. It creates a gap. And that gap can lead to misunderstandings. Over the next few weeks, that gap became more visible. Not in big arguments, but in small moments. She would express something clearly. And I would respond, a little late, a little unclear. Sometimes I needed time to process what she said. Sometimes I didn't fully understand the tone. Sometimes I translated too much and lost the emotion. There's actually a concept in communication psychology called pragmatic competence. It's not just knowing the language, it's knowing how to use it appropriately in social and emotional contexts. And that's much harder than grammar. Because grammar has rules. But emotions? They're flexible. Cultural. Personal. One night, she asked me a simple question. Why are you so quiet sometimes? That question hit harder than I expected. Because the answer wasn't simple. I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because I had too much to say, and not enough language to say it. But how do you explain that, in simple English? So I tried. I think too much before I speak. Not the full truth, but part of it. She looked at me for a moment, then smiled softly. That's okay. I like that you think. That moment stayed with me. Because instead of misunderstanding me, she accepted the version of me that I could express. And that gave me space. Space to grow. Space to try. Space to be imperfect. But not every moment was that easy. Sometimes, misunderstandings still happened. I remember one time she said, "You seem distant today." I understood the words. But I misunderstood the intention. I thought she meant I didn't care. So I became defensive. No. I just tired. Short answer. Closed tone. And just like that, the mood changed. Not because of big problems, but because of small misinterpretations. That's the danger of limited language. You don't just lose words. You lose nuance, tone, emotion. And that can affect relationships more than you expect. But here's what I learned from those moments. Communication is not about being perfect. It's about being willing to clarify. So instead of staying silent or guessing, I started asking more. What do you mean? Can you explain more? I not understand feeling. Can you say different way? Again, not perfect sentences, but honest. And honesty builds understanding. Slowly, we started developing our own way of communicating. A mix of simple English, patience, and shared context. We learned each other's patterns. Her speed. My pauses. Her directness. My hesitation. And something interesting happened. The language barrier didn't disappear. But it became less important. Because we were both making an effort. And effort creates connection. Because both people are actively engaged in understanding each other. That's exactly what was happening. We weren't just talking. We were learning each other. Word by word. Moment by moment. But even with all that progress, there was still a challenge ahead. Because understanding daily conversations is one thing. Understanding emotions is another. But dealing with conflict? With disagreement? With tension? That requires a whole new level of communication. And I wasn't ready for that yet. Because soon, something small would turn into something bigger. Not because of what we felt, but because of how we failed to express it. And that's when I realized. Love in a second language is not just about connection. It's about patience. And sometimes, it's about surviving the moments when words are not enough. Struggles in relationship. Have you ever argued with someone and later realized the problem wasn't what you said, but what you couldn't say? That's where everything started to fall apart for us. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just slowly, quietly, like something slipping through your hands while you're still trying to hold it together. Up until that point, our story felt like progress. Small conversations, shared moments, growing connection. We were learning each other, adjusting, finding a rhythm that somehow worked even with my limited English. But there's a level in every relationship where things stop being simple. Where "how was your day" turns into "what are we doing?" Where small talk becomes real talk. And real talk requires real language. That's where I started to struggle again. One evening, we were sitting together after a long day. Nothing unusual. Just quiet space, soft light, the kind of moment where conversations naturally go deeper. She looked at me and asked a question. Not fast. Not complicated. But heavy. What do you want from us? Simple words. But my brain? Completely unprepared. Because this wasn't about vocabulary anymore. This was about clarity. About intention. About emotion. And those things are hard to express, even in your native language. Now imagine doing it, in a language you're still building. I paused. Too long. And silence, in conversations like this, can say more than words. Inside my mind, everything was moving fast. I had thoughts. Feelings. Unclear ideas about the future. But turning those into English sentences? That felt impossible. So I did what many people do when they feel overwhelmed. I simplified. I don't know. 3 words. But they carried the wrong meaning. Because I didn't mean I don't care. I didn't mean I'm unsure about you. I meant I feel a lot, but I don't know how to explain it. But that's not what she heard. She went quiet. And in that quiet, something shifted. This is where language becomes dangerous. Not because of what you say, but because of what the other person understands. There's a concept in communication called interpretation gap. It's the difference between what you intend to say and what the other person actually hears. And when your language is limited, that gap becomes wider. Much wider. She looked at me and said, "You don't know?" Her tone changed slightly. Not angry, but disappointed. And I felt it. Immediately. That emotional shift is something your brain picks up very quickly, even if you don't understand every word. Because tone is universal. And now, I needed to fix something. I didn't know how to explain. I mean, I like you. I just, not good English. It sounded weak. Incomplete. And in moments like this, incomplete language creates incomplete understanding. She nodded slowly. I know your English is still growing, but feelings don't need perfect words. That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. But also, she didn't fully understand my side. Because it's not just about words. It's about access. When your brain can't access the right words fast enough, it blocks the full expression of your thoughts. It's like having a full story in your mind, but only being able to show a few pages. And the other person has to guess the rest. That's exhausting. For both sides. Over the next few days, things felt different. Not broken, but fragile. Our conversations became shorter. More careful. Less natural. And that's the thing about tension, it doesn't always explode. Sometimes, it just stays. Quietly. Between sentences. Between pauses. Between things you want to say, but don't. I started overthinking everything again. Every word. Every reaction. Every silence. And overthinking slows communication down. It makes you hesitate. Filter too much. Speak less. Which creates more distance. It's a cycle. And I was stuck in it. One night, we met again. Same place. Same people. But the energy was different. You can feel that, right? When something is not wrong, but not right either. She asked simple questions. I gave simple answers. But the depth we had before? It felt blocked. And then, something important happened. Not a big fight. Not a dramatic moment. Just a question. Can I ask you something honestly? I nodded. She looked at me, serious this time. Do you feel comfortable talking to me, or are you just trying? That question hit deeper than anything before. Because it forced me to face something I had been avoiding. Was I connecting, or just surviving conversations? And the answer? Both. But I had never said that out loud. So this time, I didn't try to be perfect. I didn't try to impress. I didn't try to protect myself. I just spoke, slowly, honestly. I feel comfortable, but also difficult. My English, slow. My feeling, fast. She listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't correct. Just listened. That moment mattered. Because instead of hiding behind simple answers, I showed the reality. Not perfect English, but real truth. And something changed. Not instantly. Not completely. But enough. Because honesty reduces the interpretation gap. Even if the language is imperfect. There's something powerful about saying what you can, instead of waiting to say it perfectly. Because waiting often means never saying it at all. That night, we didn't solve everything. But we understood something important. This relationship wasn't just about feelings. It was about effort. About patience. About learning how to communicate across differences, not just in language, but in culture, in thinking, in emotional expression. And that's not easy. But it's meaningful. Still, challenges don't disappear just because you understand them. They come back. In different forms. Stronger sometimes. And I was about to face the biggest one yet. Because talking about feelings is one thing. But building a future together? Making decisions? Facing real-life responsibilities? That requires more than effort. It requires clarity. And I was still learning how to express it. Because soon, our story would move from conversations to commitment. From questions to decisions. And that's where everything becomes real. Because love is not just about understanding each other. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard to explain why. Building a family together. What happens when love is real, but life starts asking serious questions? Not the simple ones. Not do you like me? Or how was your day? But the heavy ones. Are we building something, or just passing time? That's where our story moved next. Because after all the misunderstandings, the slow conversations, the small moments of connection and tension, we reached a point where feelings were no longer enough. We had to decide. Not perfectly. Not confidently. But honestly. It didn't happen in one big conversation. There was no dramatic scene, no perfect timing. It was more like a series of small talks that slowly became one big question. Where is this going? And for someone still learning English, that question is complicated. Not because I didn't feel ready. But because I didn't know how to explain what ready meant. One evening, we sat together again. Familiar place. Quiet atmosphere. But this time, the silence felt different, not uncomfortable, but meaningful. She looked at me and said, slowly, I don't need perfect answers. I just need to know if you're serious. Simple sentence. Clear. Honest. And for the first time, I didn't freeze. Not because my English was suddenly better. But because I stopped trying to find perfect words. I just spoke what I could. I am serious, just slow. She smiled a little. That small smile? It meant more than a long conversation. Because she understood something important. My pace was not my intention. My English was slow. But my feelings were not. And that realization created a new kind of trust. Not based on perfect communication. But based on consistent effort. From that moment, things started to shift. We became more intentional. More present. Less focused on how things sounded, and more focused on what they meant. That's when the idea of us became more real. Not just two people talking. But two people building something together. And building something always comes with challenges. Because love in real life is not just about emotions. It's about logistics. About routines. About adapting to each other's worlds. And when those worlds come from different cultures, different languages, different habits, everything becomes more complex. Take something as simple as daily routines. In my culture, certain habits are normal. In hers, they were different. Meal times. Communication styles. Personal space. Even how we handle stress. At first, these differences were interesting. Then, they became noticeable. And sometimes, frustrating. Not because one was right and the other was wrong, but because we didn't always understand the reason behind each other's behavior. That's where communication becomes critical. And again, language became both a tool and a barrier. There were moments when I wanted to explain something deeply, but my words felt too simple, too short, too incomplete. So I learned something new. Instead of trying to say everything at once, I said things step by step. Small sentences. Clear ideas. I do this because in my country, normal. Not perfect English, but enough to open the conversation. And she did the same. Explaining her habits. Her expectations. Her perspective. And slowly, we started to understand each other not just as individuals, but as products of different cultures. That understanding is powerful. Because when you understand the why, you stop judging the what. There's actually research showing that couples who actively learn about each other's cultural background tend to have stronger, more resilient relationships. Because they don't just react. They interpret. And interpretation creates patience. But of course, patience is tested when real responsibilities appear. And they did. At some point, we had to think about living together. Sharing space. Sharing expenses. Sharing life. And let me tell you, talking about rent, bills, responsibilities in a second language? That's a whole new level of challenge. Because now, it's not just emotional clarity you need. It's practical clarity. Numbers. Details. Agreements. One small misunderstanding can create big problems. So we had to slow everything down. More than before. We double-checked everything. Repeated important points. Made sure we both understood the same thing. It wasn't fast. But it was solid. And something interesting happened during that process. Our communication improved. Not because my English suddenly became advanced, but because we became more intentional. We listened more carefully, spoke more clearly, asked more questions. And that's actually how strong communication is built, not through speed, but through clarity. Eventually, we made the decision. We would move in together. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were willing to work through the imperfections. That decision felt big, exciting, but also a little scary. Because living together reveals everything. Habits you didn't notice before. Reactions you couldn't see in short conversations. Differences that are easy to ignore until they're part of your daily life. But it also creates something deeper. A shared space. A shared rhythm. A shared story. And that's what we started building. Day by day. Not perfectly. Not smoothly. But honestly. And in that shared space, my English continued to grow. Not from studying. but from living. From daily conversations. From small arguments. From laughter. From silence. Because when language becomes part of your life, it stops being something you learn. It becomes something you use. And use creates fluency. But just when things started to feel stable, life introduced something new again. Something bigger than both of us. Something that would test not just our communication, but our ability to grow together. Because building a life as two people is one thing. But becoming a family? That changes everything. And I wasn't fully ready for what that meant. Because the next chapter of our story was not just about us anymore. Raising children in two cultures. What happens when your child speaks faster than you can think? Not in your native language. In English. Fluent. Natural. Effortless. And you are still translating in your head. That's when I realized something I wasn't prepared for. Becoming a parent in a second language is not just challenging. It's humbling. Very humbling. Because everything changes when a child enters your life. Your priorities. Your routines. Your identity. And your language becomes more than just communication. It becomes influence. It becomes guidance. It becomes the voice your child hears every day. And that responsibility? It feels heavy when you're still learning. When our child was born, everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. Days felt long. Nights felt longer. But months passed quickly. And before I knew it, our child started speaking. First words. Simple sounds. Then small sentences. And here's the surprising part. Their English developed faster than mine. Of course it did. Children's brains are designed for language learning. They absorb sounds, patterns, meanings without overthinking. No fear. No hesitation. No self-judgment. Just pure learning. While adults, we analyze. We translate. We hesitate. We worry about mistakes. So one day, I found myself in a situation I never expected. My child asked me a question. In English. Fast. Natural. And I understood most of it. But not everything. And for a split second, I felt that old feeling again. The same one from my early days in America. Confusion. Pressure. That quiet panic. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was about them. And something inside me shifted again. Because when learning is no longer just for you, you find a different kind of strength. I didn't need to be perfect. I needed to be present. So I listened carefully. Picked out the key words. Focused on the meaning. And I answered. Slowly. Clearly. Not perfect. But enough. And they understood. That moment changed the way I saw my English again. Because I realized something powerful. Communication is not about matching speed. It's about matching intention. I didn't need to speak as fast as my child. I needed to respond with clarity, with attention, with care. And that was enough. But raising a child in two cultures? That adds another layer. Because now, it's not just about language. It's about identity. At home, we had a mix of cultures. Different foods. different habits, different ways of expressing emotions. And our child? Living in the middle of it all. Learning both, without realizing it. There were moments when cultural differences became very clear. Simple things. How to greet people. How to show respect. How to express disagreement. In one culture, something might be normal. In another, it might feel rude. So we had to teach not just language, but context. When you say this, it means this. When people do this, it shows respect. When you feel this, you can say it like this. And teaching something is the fastest way to learn it yourself. Because when you explain, your brain organizes information more clearly. You simplify. You connect ideas. You understand deeper. So without realizing it, my English improved again. Not through studying, but through teaching. Through daily conversations with my own child. Through answering questions. Through correcting gently. Through repeating. Again. And again. And again. Repetition works at every age. But something else happened too. Something emotional. Sometimes, my child would choose English, even when I wanted to speak my native language. And that felt strange. Not wrong. But different. Because language is connected to identity. To memory. To emotion. And when your child speaks a different dominant language, you feel a small distance. Not physical, but emotional. And that's something many people don't talk about. So we made a choice. At home, we would keep both languages alive. Not perfectly balanced, but intentionally present. Some conversations in English. Some in my native language. Stories. Songs. Small daily moments. Because bilingual environments don't happen automatically. They need effort, consistency, and patience. There were days when it felt messy. Mixed sentences. Half English, half something else. But that's part of the process. Language is not clean in real life. It's fluid, flexible, alive. And our home became a place where both cultures could exist. Not in competition, but in harmony. And through all of this, I noticed something unexpected. My confidence changed again. Not because my English was perfect, but because I was using it meaningfully. To teach, to guide, to connect, to build a family. And when language becomes part of something bigger than yourself, it stops feeling like a struggle. It starts feeling like a bridge. But of course, parenting brings challenges beyond language. Decisions about education, values, future. And those decisions require deeper communication, clearer expression, stronger understanding. And I was still growing, still learning, still improving. Because language learning doesn't stop. It evolves. Just like life. And just when I thought I had found a rhythm, life asked another question. Not about survival. Not about connection. But about identity. Because after everything, moving, struggling, loving, building a family, I had to face something important. Who was I now? Not the person who left everything behind. Not the person who struggled to order coffee. but not fully someone else either. And answering that question? That required a new kind of confidence. One I hadn't fully discovered yet. But I was getting closer. Closer than ever before. Finding confidence again. What if confidence is not something you build, but something you remember? Not the loud, fearless version you see in movies. But a quiet kind of confidence, the one that grows slowly, almost invisibly, until one day, you realize you're no longer the same person. That's where I found myself after everything. After the move. After the confusion. After the love, the misunderstandings, the family, the long nights of thinking in two languages at the same time. Life didn't suddenly become easy. But something inside me became steady. And that's a different kind of strength. You don't notice it immediately. There's no big moment where music plays and everything feels solved. It shows up in small ways. Very small ways. Like the first time you answer a question, without translating in your head. Or the moment you join a conversation, and forget to be afraid. Or when someone speaks fast, and instead of panicking, you just listen. That's when I started to realize. I wasn't the same person who arrived in Washington State. Back then, every word felt heavy. Now, words felt lighter. Not perfect. But natural enough. And here's the surprising part. My English didn't become perfect. But my relationship with English completely changed. Before, English was something I had to fight. Now, it was something I could use. That shift matters more than you think. Because when you stop seeing language as a problem, you start using it as a tool. And tools make life easier. I remember one specific moment that made this clear. I was at the grocery store again, the same place where everything began. Same aisles. Same routine. But this time, something felt different. A customer came up to me and asked a question. Not slow. Not simple. A full, natural sentence. And without thinking, I answered. Immediately. No pause. No translation. Just response. And after they left, I stood there for a second and thought. Wait, did I just do that? That moment felt bigger than it should have. Because it wasn't about the sentence. It was about what it represented. Progress. Real progress. There's a concept in psychology called automaticity. It's when a skill becomes so familiar that you don't need to think about it consciously anymore. Driving a car. Typing on a keyboard. And eventually, speaking a language. That's what I was starting to experience. Not everywhere. Not all the time. But enough to notice. And once you notice progress, your confidence grows. Not loudly. But steadily. Another moment came at home. My child asked me a question again, this time more complex, more detailed. And instead of feeling pressure, I felt calm. I listened. Understood. Answered. Not perfectly. But clearly. And they understood. That simple exchange carried something powerful. Because it showed me that communication is not about perfect language. It's about shared understanding. And shared understanding doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. Attention. Effort. Those things I had been building all along. Without even realizing it. But confidence is not just about success. It's also about how you handle mistakes. And I still made mistakes. Of course I did. Wrong words. Strange sentences. Moments where I misunderstood something completely. But now? Those moments didn't stop me. They didn't define me. They just happened. And then I moved on. That's a huge difference. Because fear of mistakes is what holds most people back. Not lack of knowledge. Not lack of ability. Fear. But once you realize that mistakes don't destroy communication, they just shape it. You become free. Free to try. Free to speak. Free to learn faster. There's actually research showing that people who are less afraid of making mistakes improve faster in language learning. Because they engage more. They practice more. They take more risks. That was me now. Not fearless. But less afraid. And that was enough. Another change I noticed was in how I listened. Before, I tried to catch every word. Now, I focused on meaning. On tone. On context. Because real understanding doesn't come from hearing every word clearly. It comes from connecting the message. And once you train your brain to do that, everything becomes easier. Even fast speech. Even unfamiliar topics. Because your brain starts predicting, not just reacting. That's when listening becomes natural. And natural listening leads to natural speaking. It's all connected. But maybe the biggest change of all was how I saw myself. I wasn't someone who struggles with English anymore. I was someone who communicates in English. That identity shift is powerful. Because your identity shapes your behavior. If you believe you're bad at something, you avoid it. If you believe you're improving, you engage with it. And engagement creates progress. It's a cycle. A positive one this time. Looking back, I realized something simple but important. Confidence didn't come from one big success. It came from hundreds of small moments. Small conversations. Small risks. Small improvements. Each one adding up. Slowly. Quietly. Until one day, you feel different. And that's the part most people don't see. They want fast results. Big changes. Immediate confidence. But real growth? It's slow. It's subtle. It's built in moments you almost forget. But they matter. They always matter. And now, standing here, after everything, I could finally say something honestly. Not perfectly. But clearly. I am not afraid anymore. Not because I know everything. But because I know I can handle not knowing. And that's real confidence. But even with all that growth, there was still one final thing I needed to face. Not language. Not communication. But meaning. Because after building a life, a relationship, a family, you start asking a different kind of question. Was it worth it? All the struggle. All the confusion. All the moments where you wanted to give up. And answering that question? That's how you truly understand your journey. Because the end of one story is often the beginning of another. And mine was just about to come full circle. A new life, a happy ending. What if the life you once struggled to understand becomes the life you never want to leave? Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. Fully. Honestly. Built step by step, from confusion, from mistakes, from moments where you almost gave up, but didn't. That's where I found myself now. Not at the beginning anymore. Not in the middle of uncertainty. But at a quiet point where everything finally made sense. Not clearly. But deeply. If you had met me back then, the version of me standing at the airport, holding a one-way ticket, afraid of every sentence, every conversation, every unknown, you probably wouldn't recognize me now. And that's not because I became perfect. It's because I became comfortable. Comfortable with my voice. Comfortable with my pace. Comfortable with being someone who is still learning, but no longer afraid. That's the real transformation. Because here's something no one tells you. Fluency is not the moment you speak perfectly. It's the moment you stop being afraid to speak imperfectly. And that moment? It changes everything. Now, my life in Washington State feels normal. But not the kind of normal you ignore. The kind you appreciate. Morning conversations at home. Simple jokes with my child. Small talks at work that don't feel like tests anymore. Even silence feels comfortable now. Because I'm no longer trying to prove anything. I'm just living. And living in a second language? It's a different kind of experience. You don't just learn new words. You learn new ways to think. New ways to express. New ways to connect. And somewhere along the way, you build a new version of yourself. Not replacing who you were, but expanding it. That's something I didn't expect. I thought moving to a new country meant losing something. But in reality, I gained more. More patience. More awareness. More understanding, not just of others, but of myself. And of course, I gained a family. Not just the idea of it, but the real, everyday version of it. The kind that laughs together, argues sometimes, learns together, grows together. The kind that doesn't need perfect communication to feel connected. Because connection is not built on perfect sentences. It's built on consistent effort. On showing up. On trying again, even when it's hard. There are still moments when my English is not perfect. Of course. That doesn't disappear. Sometimes I still search for words. Sometimes I still pause. Sometimes I still make mistakes. But now? Those moments don't stop me. They don't define me. They just remind me how far I've come. And that's the difference. Because progress is not about removing all difficulties. It's about changing how you respond to them. Before, difficulty meant fear. Now, it means growth. Before, mistakes meant failure. Now, they mean learning. That shift? It's everything. Looking back, I realized something simple. There was no single moment that changed my life. No perfect plan. No instant success. Just a series of small decisions. To try. To speak. To stay. To continue, even when it felt uncomfortable. And those small decisions? They built everything. That's why I want to ask you something. Not a complicated question. Just a simple one. Are you waiting to feel ready before you start? Because if you are, you might be waiting forever. Readiness doesn't come first. Action does. Confidence doesn't come first. Experience does. And fluency? It doesn't come from understanding everything. It comes from staying in the process long enough for things to make sense. That's what this story really is. Not just about moving to America. Not just about learning English. But about choosing not to quit. Even when it's hard. Even when it's slow. Even when it feels like you're not improving. Because you are. You just don't see it yet. But one day, you will. In a small moment. A simple conversation. A sentence you say without thinking. And you'll realize. I've changed. Not completely. But enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to believe in yourself again. And maybe that's all you need. Because starting a new life is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more of who you already are, in a new way. So if you're standing at your own beginning right now, feeling unsure, feeling tired, feeling like giving up, let me tell you something honestly. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to take the next step. Even if it's small. Even if it's imperfect. Because small steps lead to real change. And real change? It leads to a life you once thought was impossible. That's my story. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. And if it could happen for me, it can happen for you too. Slowly. Naturally. One sentence at a time. One moment at a time. One brave step at a time. New life, start now. That sentence I whispered on the plane? It wasn't perfect. But it was enough. And sometimes, enough is exactly where everything begins. What if the story you just heard is only the beginning of something much bigger? Because here's the truth most people don't realize. Learning English is not really about words, grammar, or perfect pronunciation. It's about unlocking a new version of yourself, a version that can connect, love, grow, and build a life you once thought was impossible. If you've ever felt stuck, slow, or ready to give up, remember this: every fluent speaker you admire once struggled to say a simple sentence. The difference? They didn't stop. And neither should you. So don't wait for the perfect moment. Start with one sentence. One conversation. One small step today. Because your new life might be just one decision away. Backhand index pointing right. If this story made you feel something, helped you understand English a little more, or gave you even a small reason to keep going, hit like. Leave a comment, and subscribe for more real English stories, slow listening practice, and powerful life-changing lessons. Your journey is just getting started. And trust me, the next story might be yours.